Welcome back to Benny's Custom Works, proudly supported by Valvoline and Sparesbox. Don't forget Benny5 on checkout. This week, the wait is over. You're probably a little bit confused as to why there's two Crown Comfort mild hybrids behind me. Well, I think we may have touched on it a little bit before on camera, but long story short, this car is donating the hybrid system to this car, and the 2J is going in the black car. This kind of happened about 6 months ago. A mate of mine, Matt, imported this white Crown Comfort mild hybrid that's on the hoist. It came through Port Kembla in Sydney, and somewhere between it going on the boat and arriving at compliance, the hybrid system became basically inoperative. The theory is that it was jump-started incorrectly because there is a pretty specific way to jump-start these mild hybrid vehicles. So we started looking for parts to actually repair the white car. And while we got some of the parts, a lot of the parts weren't available either secondhand or new. So we floated the idea of buying a parts car, and originally I was going to organise to get the parts removed in Japan and the car was going to be scrapped. Then this black thing turned up, and it's actually quite a good car. The interior is really good, the body's really good. It's only got 80,000 Ks on it. So all of the hybrid system is going to migrate into the white car, and this thing is now going to be potentially another 8-second car. I'm going to dub it the Wild Hybrid. There's no hybrid system in it anymore, but it's a hybrid of multiple parts. It's going to have a 2J, it's going to have a Turbo 400, it's going to have a 9-inch. We're going to do coilovers in it. It's going to get S14 or R32 brakes on the front, probably do S14 or S15 brakes on the back. It's going to be caged, it's going to be engineered. We're going to do all sorts of stuff to it. I'm hoping to actually get the engineer on camera to discuss some of the things we're going to do with the car. So all of you people that are tinfoil hatting about engineering cars, we can actually debunk some myths and have a bit of a chat about it. But the plan is basically to try and build this car over the next 6 to 9 months. It's definitely going to be a challenge because I'm going to be to and from America quite a bit this year. We've got at least 3 trips, possibly 4 to the US this year. So I'm hoping to actually get some other people to work in the background on the vehicle. I'm going to get Paulie to do the chassis work being the cage and the rear end. Empire's going to tackle the 2J at this stage, and Hughes will be providing the transmission, Turbo 400. Circle D is going to do the converter for us, and we're going to get all sorts of bits and pieces along the way. Shockworks are doing the coilover, so that's going to be pretty cool. Side note about these GBS 12s is effectively they're actually a diesel 80 series Cresta or Cressida or Chaser. It's basically an LX80 platform. The wheelbase is longer, but all of the front end is exactly the same. So a lot of the stuff we've done to the Cresta is pretty much going to cross over to this platform, which is a happy coincidence. I had no idea how effectively agricultural these things were. They are effectively taxis. The black one is a civilian version. The white one is a legitimate taxi from Japan. It even has the side opening door. It's got all the stickers still on it. It's even got evidence of where the roof light was. So it's actually got quite low Ks considering it was a taxi. It's only got 130,000 kilometers. Someone told me it was a private taxi. Now I believe that's kind of like a hire car in Australia. So rather than it just sitting on the street, you'll call up and book a job. But yeah, that's another story in itself. But this is the 2J car. Yeah, the plan is to run 8s with it. It's not a Cresta replacement as such, but because the Cresta is going to be in the US and potentially in other countries after we leave the US, I'm still undecided what we're going to do. So there could be potential for the Cresta to not be here for quite a while. I'm still pretty committed to doing events in Australia. We want to do more drag and drive stuff. Street Machine Drag Challenge, the 3-day weekend one. So yeah, there's all sorts of events that if we don't have 2 cars, we're going to miss out on. So yeah, the goal is to basically finish this car, and the White Falcon that you guys have seen on the channel before, that's actually going to go somewhere else to get done now. There's been a little bit of chat in the background, and someone else is going to take that project on now, and it's going to be completely repowered again. So that'll be the 3rd drivetrain that's gone into that, or 4th drivetrain that's gone into that car. I don't want to give that away because it's not for me to talk about. It is going to be on another channel, so that's going to be pretty cool. But yeah, I'm probably going to pull the motor and box out of that before it leaves because the Windsor and Powerglide that are in it now are not going to be suitable for the project ahead. Interestingly, these actually both have solid axle rear ends, so they're already a 4-link car, which is going to lend itself really well to drag racing. Much easier to update to a 9-inch diff because all of the body mounts are already there. Not like the Cresta where we had to add arm pickup points and a panhard rod pickup point. All that stuff already exists in these cars. It will need to be beefed up for what we're going to do with it, but all of the structure and the bones are already there. So yeah, I think starting out with a live axle car is going to be much easier than trying to retrofit another solid axle into an IRS car. I've already touched on it. All of these Crown hybrids, or especially the taxi spec ones, all have a solid axle or a live axle. It's a pretty archaic setup, but they're very strong. This particular one is an F-Series diff, which is pretty common to a lot of Toyotas from, I believe, the mid-80s all the way until mid-2000s. The G and the F-Series were also available in IRS. The F-Series is what started life in the Lexus IS600, and we've now got a G-Series. So potentially if this was a G-Series, we'd try and stick with it, but the F just isn't strong enough. Interestingly, the G-Series is the Hilux diff for anyone out there that's not totally across it, but Hilux diff is thrown around a lot in the compact scene, especially in Australia. A lot of people put Hilux diffs into fairly powerful cars, say up to 700-800 horsepower, so they are pretty capable for what they are. This setup is pretty basic, but it's also going to work pretty well for what we're going to do because it already has effectively a coilover on the diff. We will relocate the upper pickup point. However, the geometry that's here is actually not too bad for what we're going to do with it. We're going to move the coilover inboard a little bit because we can actually put a 10-inch wide wheel in the factory wheel arches, much in a similar way to the Cresta. There's a ton of comparison under here, even though the Cresta was an IRS car. Anyone that's not familiar with the term IRS, it's independent rear suspension. So the diff center is mounted to a subframe, and then the arms come out to hubs and the wheels move independently of each other, hence the name independent rear suspension. Whereas these beam axle or solid axle rear ends, they don't move independently, and they also don't have any camber or toe adjustment. So for a circuit type car, you're much better off with an IRS. For a drag car, you could argue that a solid axle is a much better sort of setup. The Cresta has a solid axle, a 9-inch in it, and for parts compatibility between cars, we are going to use a 9-inch and a Turbo 400. So when the stars align and both cars are together, it means that we have a lot less spares to run both cars rather than trying to have an A340 for this and a G-Series and all these other random bits and pieces. Yeah, hopefully we can run multiple cars on one spare set effectively. But yeah, it's a pretty cool setup. It's pretty basic and it's easy for us to modify. There's a few things under this that are different from some of the other Crowns. There's a lot of stuff under here that's hybrid related. So we've got the main power cables that actually run. They come through the boot floor through a pretty large grommet, and they run under the car from back to front. All of that is going to get pulled out. Obviously, this is the white car, so this is staying hybrid. The black car that's outside, which we'll show you guys the engine bay of in a little bit, all of that stuff's going to get removed. And there's every chance looking at this that I may actually run the fuel lines through that grommet because it looks like a pretty good spot. There's plenty of clearance to run under the car. So yeah, we may be able to repurpose some of this hybrid stuff to actually run larger fuel lines through. Factory, these only have a 5/16 or 8mm fuel line, so it's definitely not going to be enough for us. And I think they also don't even run a return. I think the reg's in the tank, so that's not going to work for us either. So we'll potentially modify the tank and put a Raceworks hanger in the factory tank, or we may build a tank to stay in the factory position because I don't really want to put a fuel cell in it. Learning a lot of stuff from building the Cresta to what it was versus what it became. I'm really trying to keep this more of a street car in the fact of stock fuel tank, much less busyness in the interior, like trying to tuck the cage up a bit more. Interestingly, this has a much higher roof line, so it means we can put the cage really high in the roof of the car without sort of intruding on passenger space as much. I'm also going to put a bolt-in taxi bar in this particular cage because it means we will be able to engineer it for 5-seat occupancy, whereas technically in New South Wales, the Cresta is not able to have rear seat passengers. Knowing what I know now about that car, we can evolve it a little bit into this car and potentially have a better setup for drag and drive stuff, not specifically like all-out faster car. Look, I don't think this is going to be as fast as the Cresta, but I think we can make it a pretty good all-rounder. And yeah, looking at underside of the car, there's definitely a lot of stuff we can do to make it work better for us. There's already tons of clearance for the exhaust system, for instance. Like this middle part of the car through here, we're definitely going to be able to put a nice 4-inch system with a good sized cat on it. Potentially we could put a side pipe on it, but to be perfectly honest, I'm not a massive fan of side pipes. The Cresta has always had a full system on it. We have recently modified it to have a dump tip at the back and a 3-inch from the diff back. So for the road duties, it's much quieter now than it used to be. However, there's no way that 3-inch rear section is actually going to flow enough power. So we do have a dump tip that's V-banded on the back for that, which I think we've shown you guys before. Hard to show you now because the car's in America. But yeah, moving forward, these things all run an A340 or a version of the A340 transmission. These particular ones actually have a slip yoke because they're a solid rear end. May be good to build a powerful box out of because it's already a slip yoke setup. I don't really know, and these things they're no good to me personally, so I'll probably actually give Matt, the guy who owns this one, the transmission out of the black car as well because there's no real use for it. The engine, however, is the same or a very similar engine to the IS200. It's a 1G FE. And being that one's only got 80,000 Ks on it, I think it'll be a pretty good donor engine for someone with an IS200 that's launched a motor. So that'll probably get chucked on Marketplace at some point. Moving forward, as I've already touched on, the front end is basically an MX-83 Cressida. It has 2-channel ABS, which is super basic. I think the last of the MX-83s had ABS in the front. So yeah, this is much the same. It's a strut front, basic Toyota setup, which they've run for years. Ball joint on the lower arm, just with a caster rod, rack and pinion steering, obviously. Most Crowns up until I think the 150 series all were separate chassis and a steering box. When they started to go much later in the Crowns, they went to just a monocoque with a rack, sort of more traditional Toyota stuff going forward. But yeah, these things are sort of following that trend, and like I've already said, it's basically a Cressida. So yeah, parts are going to be pretty easy to get, and brake conversions on Cressidas are super common. So the R33 GTS-T brake conversion is probably the most common upgrade for a Cressida. However, it does restrict you to front wheel clearance. I do want to run 15s all round on the black car, so I'm probably going to look at either S14, S15 4-pot front because they're slightly smaller disc, or the R32 GTS-T for the same reason. The only reason I'd probably go the GTS-T over the S14, S15 is the calipers are actually aluminium instead of cast iron, so they're going to be much lighter. But we're going to bring this one down and we'll swap it over the black one, and we'll start to look at the hybrid system and hypothesize on why this one's failed and what parts need to go between the cars. And just like that, we've changed to the black car. The rear trims are already somewhat out of this. When it was complied, they fitted child seat anchors, so all the boot trims I actually removed before it went there. They kind of refitted them, so I'm going to redo that later. That's neither here nor there. We're going to kind of go through the hybrid system to my knowledge of how it works. I may be wrong. If I am wrong, please correct me because I'd like to know how it works properly. Matt's probably going to die a little bit inside watching this video because I'll no doubt get something wrong. But this thing's pretty weird in the way it's set up. It basically has a standard 12-volt battery, which 95% of the car runs off, which is in the boot already, interestingly. But it's also got a second battery, which is also mounted in the boot, which is a 36-volt. And to my knowledge, the hybrid system is a 48-volt system, which basically combines the 12-volt operating battery and the 36-volt hybrid battery to create the hybrid drive, which in this instance is effectively an alternator, which is also a motor. So it runs quite a large belt, and when the hybrid system's working, the alternator is actually a motor rather than being, it's basically driving the engine as a supplementary power source. I've seen sort of some of these style conversions aftermarket as well, and they seem to work all right. But yeah, we've got the battery set up in the boots, pretty basic. It's not like all of these late model hybrids where you've got a massive bank of lithium batteries. This thing's basically a lead acid thing as well, but it is really kind of just a fuel economy booster in my opinion. It's not a true hybrid system, and yeah, they are generally called mild hybrids, A, because of the voltage, and B, because of the range. So it doesn't, to my knowledge, it doesn't run purely on the electric drive. I may be wrong. If I am, please correct me. But yeah, the system's somewhat more basic than the current generation hybrid stuff. So that's pretty much the boot side of it. We're going to jump into the engine bay now and dive through. There's some pretty quirky stuff that's actually been done and pretty smart the way Toyota set it up. We've got a power management module, which basically sorts out the alternator and the motor side of the alternator in one unit. There's a lot of big cables obviously running around the bay. Pretty much anything generally with a hybrid system that's yellow or orange is high current or high voltage, I should say. So typically most mechanics aren't trained in the hybrid system. I am also one of those people, so we're going to be learning a bit. Matt is actually going to be coming down helping us strip this car and reset up his car. He's pretty versed in this hybrid system. He's done a ton of research. He's got all the factory workshop manuals from Japan for it as well, so that'll be pretty cool to see how it works correctly and someone with a little bit more knowledge of it. Obviously mentioned already the orange cable that runs down here to our alternator, which is also the generator. It's still pretty much in the standard location you would assume an alternator to be. Bolts to the side of the block, and as I mentioned, we've got this really wide belt. I think it's about a 10 pk belt, so it's basically driving the crank. So it's a supplementary power device. Effectively, it adds a drive to the crank, which then just sends it through the powertrain as per normal. Some of the other mild hybrid style setups, GM did one in the mid 2000s, which instead of working with the alternator, it replaced the starter motor. So it was a big sort of set of coil windings in the bell housing area. And a lot of those things had issues as well. And the biggest problem with those systems is when they fail, you don't have a starter motor anymore. So a lot of those pickups and trucks and vans and those sort of things were scrapped because of those failures. They are fairly simple to revert back to a normal non-hybrid system. I believe the Boss Garage might even have done something with that a while back. I remember watching a channel that sort of dealt with that system and reverted one of those cars back to a sort of more conventional non-hybrid system. But I'm digressing. This thing here, it's all coming out. It's going to have some really good cats in it for scrap again. Typically Toyotas, when they do anything hybrid, the cats are primo. So yeah, should be plenty of value in the scrapping of those cats. Another budget-friendly tip, scrap all the cats, don't bash them out. But I'm waffling again. So this thing's all gonna come out. We're gonna slip the 2J in here. Gonna go Hypertune, plenum, probably do a 6-boost exhaust manifold, not sure what turbo yet. Hypertune cooler, hyper clamps all the way around. And it's gonna be set up pretty cool. Actually, one thing I didn't touch on, the hybrid system in these runs a completely separate cooling system. Now, it runs the same radiator, but it's actually got a separate, or a diverter plate in the tank that creates a completely separate sealed system for the hybrid system. So it is water cooled, and I believe only the box, this inverter power unit, I believe that is the only thing that's water cooled, the only water cooled component of the hybrid system. But yeah, it's pretty cool to see how they've sort of used what they already had available in that the radiator was already a known part. All they've done is create different end tanks to divert the water or block the water off between systems. I was extremely confused when I first looked at it because the actual normal radiator cap is 0.9 bar, and then the hybrid cap is only 29 kPa. So I was trying to work out how the pressure differential would work and why all the main cooling system wouldn't just blow out of that cap. Obviously, with a little bit more research, worked out that it is actually a sealed setup in that radiator. So interestingly, the hybrid system doesn't, or the hybrid cars don't have as big of a cooling system capacity, but typically Toyota do go pretty overkill with radiators. So I don't think that sort of 250 mil of radiator is actually going to make a massive difference to this tiny little Asthmatic 1G. However, I don't think this radiator is going to cop it with a 2J. So we'll look at what fits in there. I'm going to take a punt that probably something else Toyota is going to slot in there. It looks pretty common to other stuff. Hopefully, maybe something like an MX-83 or a JZA-70, or maybe even a later radiator like a JZX-100 or an IS-200. So yeah, there's definitely going to be something that fits in that hole more or less. It may need a little bit of modification, but yeah, I'm pretty confident we're going to be able to come up with something to make this thing slot into the 2J setup much easier. I will still go hard pipes much like the Cresta. I'm pretty paranoid about water getting under the tyres in any drag car, so I do like to get rid of any rubber in the cooling system. Much in the same way we'll run all Raceworks Teflon lines to the turbo for water cooling. I'm undecided if we're going to run a heater in this car, but I guess we'll decide that later on. As you'd imagine, this thing's pretty utilitarian. It is effectively a taxi. This particular one, like I've already mentioned a few times, is a civilian issue one. The white one is a legitimate taxi. But yeah, it's got super basic aircon. I think you can actually isolate the passenger airbag. So you could potentially put a child seat in the front if you wanted to. But I mean, that's neither here nor there because we're not going to be putting child seats in this thing. But yeah, it's super basic, but it is super clean. This thing only has 80,000 Ks on it. It had doilies on it at some point, which unfortunately they have removed, but there's adhesive sort of damage on the cloth. The driver's seat, it's not going to matter because it's not going to be here for long. We're probably going to put a Kirky in it. And much like the Cresta, the driver's seat may end up being sacrificed to make a cover to match. But yeah, it's super clean. It's almost a shame to cut it up, but inversely, it is a Crown Comfort. There's literally millions of these things sitting in Japan, scrapping, dying. So pulling one more apart, I really don't think is going to matter. And it's much better than what would have happened to it, because in all honesty, this thing probably would have gone through the crusher if we'd harvested the hybrid stuff out of it in Japan. The one downside to doing it this way, obviously, was that the shipping of a car to Australia is much dearer than shipping the parts. But we've ended up with another car and something to build, so pretty cool. The next time you guys see this car, we're actually going to take it to the track. A lot of people are laughing. I do want to get a base pass out of this thing, purely so we know what we started with. It would be nice to arguably say that we'll make this go twice as fast or twice as quick than what it originally ran. I'm going to take a punt. This thing's going to run probably between an 18 to a 20-second pass. I may be a little bit optimistic in that even. This thing could go as slow as a 25. So interested to see what it does and what we can make it do going forward. I've already mentioned a few times, this thing is probably going to be built over about a 9-month period. So yeah, this will be on and off the channel, among other projects. We've actually got 2 other cars which are going to appear on the channel, as well as cars that you guys already know. So one of those other cars literally just turned up today. So yeah, we're going to basically get that thing registered, and then it'll appear on the channel pretty soon as well. Massive thanks to everyone as always. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.